Today, let's discuss a topic that every property buyer needs to know about, that's stamp duty land tax, or SDLT. Let's start with the basics. What is stamp duty and who needs to pay for it? Then we'll break down the changes with SDLT in recent times. We'll look at the new rules, explain who's most affected. Then we'll look at the recent updates announced on October the 31st last year and the big changes coming into play on the 1st of April 2025 this year. Then we'll share some tips on how to make the most of these changes. So what exactly is stamp duty land tax, or SDLT? Well, effectively, it's a tax that you pay when you purchase a property in England or Northern Ireland over a certain price. For example, you're buying a freehold house or you're buying a new or existing leasehold property. Now, how much you pay in stamp duty depends on a few points. Number one being the purchase price. Generally, the more expensive the property, the more stamp duty you'll pay, because SDLT is calculated in bands, much like the UK income tax system. Number two is the type of property. Is it residential, such as a flat or a house? Or is it commercial, such as a shop or an office? So the rates differ depending on the type of property. Number three would be your property ownership status. If you already own another property, then additional surcharges may apply. For example, the now additional 5% higher rate tax, or the 2% non-resident surcharge if you're based overseas. Buyers do ask us, when is it due? When do I need to pay this? HMRC do say that it's due within 14 days of the property completing, but in real terms, you tend to pay this on completion when you remit the funds to your solicitor. Now, stamp duty isn't exactly new. It's been around for over 300 years, but it has seen a lot of changes in recent years, and in the last 10 years alone, there's been 6 key changes. So let's quickly recap some of these key changes. On April the 1st, 2016, the higher rate for additional properties was introduced, and this was at 3%. So anybody who had second homes or buying a buy-to-let investment, they would have to pay 3%, which made it more expensive to invest in additional properties. On July the 8th, 2020, there was an SDLT holiday put in place. So the nil rate threshold bracket was temporarily raised to £500,000, meaning buyers could save potentially up to £15,000 off their SDLT bill. So let's have a look at what the stamp duty rates were before the SDLT holiday, and we'll look at what they were afterwards. So before the SDLT holiday, the nil rate threshold was set at £125,000 for standard buyers and £300,000 for first-time buyers. So for example, if a standard rate buyer was buying a property for £500,000, they would pay 0% up to 125k, 2% for the next portion being 125,000, so that equals to £2,500 tax, and then 5% for the remaining portion being 250k, being 12,500, which gives you a total tax bill of £15,000 in total. For a first-time buyer, if they bought a property at £500,000, they would pay 0% up to £300,000 and 5% on the next portion of £200,000 to make it the £500,000 purchase price. So their tax bill would be at £10,000 in total. But on July the 8th, 2020, the government temporarily raised the nil rate threshold up to £500,000. So that meant buyers could save up to £15,000 on their stamp duty, which massively boosted the housing market. We definitely saw a big increase in transactions during that time, so let's have a look at what the rates look like during that holiday. For the same example of £500,000 as a property purchase price, pretty simple to calculate, you'd pay nothing on stamp duty. The SDLT holiday lasted until June the 30th, 2021, after which the nil rate threshold was gradually reduced. So from 1st of July to 30th of September, as you can see on the table, the nil rate threshold dropped from £500,000 down to £250,000 before reverting to its original levels 3 months later on October the 1st, 2021. So let's have a look at how the rates tapered after the holiday had ended. So as you can see from the table, after the holiday period ended from October the 1st, 2021, it reverted back to what it was previously prior to the holiday. So first-time buyers buying up to £500,000 could take advantage of the first £300,000 portion being taxed at 0%, and then the remaining £200,000 to make up the £500,000 purchase price would be taxed at 5%. And then the standard buyers, you'd benefit from zero tax up to £125,000, and then from 125 to 250 you'd be taxed at 2%, and then from 250 to 925 you'd be taxed at 5% and thereon. The holiday gave buyers a huge opportunity to save on their SDLT bill, especially for properties priced up to £500,000. For example, during the holiday, a £500,000 property would have no SDLT payable, but after that had ended, buyers would pay £15,000 under the standard rate and £10,000 if they were first-time buyers. Now, if that wasn't enough changes in between all of this, on April the 1st, 2021, there was a non-resident surcharge. So that was an additional 2% surcharge for any non-UK residents buying property in the UK. Now, this was aimed at reducing speculative investments in the UK. Now, some might be thinking, well, what is a non-UK resident and what is the criteria for that? The best place to check out would be the government website. So if we head over to there and just scroll down over to the stamp duty land tax residence test, it specifies that for individuals, because we'll base it on individuals for the purpose of this video, individual buyers are non-UK resident in relation to the transaction if they are not present in the UK for at least 183 days during the 12 months before their purchase. So this would apply in the case of, let's say, we have an overseas buyer, they bought off plan, they were in another country at the time, and prior to completion, they were not in the UK for 183 days. They would have to pay the extra 2% surcharge. Now, if we scroll further down, we get to the when and how to get a refund. Now, over here, it states individual buyers are able to claim a refund of the 2% surcharge if after the purchase they are present in the UK for at least 183 days during any continuous 365-day period that falls within the 2-year period. Now, that 2-year period is beginning 364 days before the effective date of the transaction and ends 365 days after the effective date of the transaction. So you may be able to get a refund post-completion, but you would have to pay the 2% surcharge first. In any case, it's always best to check with a tax advisor or solicitor, which of course we can point you in the right direction for that. Okay, more changes. So September the 23rd, 2022, there was an increase in the nil-rate band from £125,000 to £250,000, which eased the tax burden for many buyers. Now, first-time buyers also got a boost because their threshold rose to £425,000 and they were able to buy properties up to £625,000 to qualify for the reliefs. Again, using the example of £500,000, if you were a standard rate buyer, you'd pay 0% up to the £250,000 portion. Then you'll pay 5% on the next portion being £250,000. So that's £12,500 in total for your stamp duty bill as a standard rate buyer. Now let's compare this to a first time buyer. If you bought at £500,000, you'd pay nothing, 0%, up to the £425,000, and then you'd pay 5% on the remaining £75,000, which equates to £3,750 total as a SDLT bill. Now let's focus on the two most recent changes, the October 31st, 2024 updates and the significant change happening from the 1st of April, 2025 this year. As of October the 31st, 2024, the SDLT surcharge for additional properties has increased from 3% to 5%. So this applies to any buyers purchasing second homes or buy-to-let properties. So what does this mean in number terms? Well, using our example of £500,000, you would now pay £40,000 in SDLT under the new rules compared to £30,000 before. Effectively, it's a straightforward 2% on the purchase price. The next big change is happening on April the 1st, 2025. Now, this is where the temporary thresholds introduced back in 2022 go back to their old levels. So here's what's happening. The standard nil rate threshold drops from £250,000 back down to £125,000. And then for first time buyers, the threshold reduces from £425,000 back down to £300,000 to what they were before. And now the relief will only apply to properties priced up to £500,000. So this means that buyers will pay more tax from April 2025 onwards. So let's break it down. In this example, we'll use a standard buyer buying a £500,000 property and what their SDLT bill would be before April the 1st, 2025 and after April the 1st, 2025 to see what the difference is. If they completed before the 1st of April, they would have a nil rate band up to £250,000 on the purchase price, and they would be taxed at 5% for the remaining £250,000 to make it £500,000 purchase price. So their SDLT bill would be £12,500. Now, if they completed the purchase after the 1st of April 2025, you could see from these two tables there's an extra band in there, which is the £125,001 to £250,000 charged at 2%. So effectively, this is an extra £2,500 because the nil rate band has been decreased to £125,000. And this is pretty much across the board. So their stamp duty rate has gone up by £2,500, meaning their total stamp duty bill is £15,000. So just to clarify what a standard buyer is, this is, for example, a buyer that has bought a property in the past, sold it, maybe rented for a while, and then looking to buy their main residence again. So at the end of the transaction, they only have the one property. Another example is, let's say, a family that was living in a flat, then they've sold their property simultaneously to buy a house to upsize, and at the end of the transaction, they only have the one property. This would be classed as a standard rate buyer. Do note though, if you're in a situation where you already own a property, looking to sell it but don't sell it in time for a completion of a new property, you will have to pay the additional surcharge on the new property. But if you sell your previous home within 3 years of purchasing the new one, you may be eligible for a stamp duty refund, but you will need to claim it within 12 months of selling your home. So let's have a look at a scenario for a first-time buyer buying a £500,000 property before April the 1st, 2025 and completing after April the 1st, 2025. So just to clarify, a first-time buyer is somebody that has never owned a property globally before. So looking at this table, if they completed before April the 1st, 2025, they would be liable to pay £3,750 in stamp duty. The nil rate band is £425,000, so they would only have to pay the portion of £75,000 taxed at 5%, and that would be their stamp duty bill. Do note though, this can apply to properties up to £625,000. Now, if they completed that property for £500,000 after the 1st of April, they will be paying a lot more in terms of stamp duty. So you can see that the nil rate band has reduced from £425,000 down to £300,000, so they won't pay anything on that portion. But the next portion of £200,000 to make it £500,000, they will pay 5% on that portion, meaning their stamp duty is at £10,000 in total. So this only applies up to £500,000 as a property purchase price. So that is a pretty dramatic increase from £3,750 up to £10,000 SDLT due. Additionally, if the property price is over £500,000, then they will lose all the relief and they would have to pay the standard stamp duty rates. To recap, there are two major changes for first-time buyers. Number one being the nil rate band reduces from £425,000 down to £300,000. The second one being relief only applies to properties up to £500,000, which is down from £625,000. So after going through the changes and the different scenarios with different types of buyers, it looks like the first-time buyers are hit the hardest, unfortunately, and here's why. For the standard rate SDLT buyers, across the board, they will face a £2,500 increase because of the extra 2% banding on the £125,000 portion. So that's £2,500 across the board for those guys. Now, for the first-time buyers, they lose the most because the nil rate threshold reduces from £425,000 down to £300,000. And then the maximum price cap for relief is dropping from £625,000 down to £500,000. So let me give you an example. Again, based on a £500,000 property, before April 2025, they would pay £3,700 in SDLT. Now, after April, they will pay £10,000. So that's an increase of £6,250. Now, in another scenario where they buy a property over £500,000, they will lose all relief and pay the same SDLT as a standard rate buyer. For a £550,000 property as a first-time buyer, before April 2025, the SDLT would be £6,250. Now, after April 2025, as a first-time buyer, if you bought at £550,000, which is over the threshold, their SDLT would be £17,500, which is an increase of £11,250. So for first-time buyers, they face the most dramatic increase, especially those purchasing prices of around £300,000 to £625,000. And for additional property owners, their surcharge increases from 3% to now 5%. So this adds an extra 2% flat across the board on the purchase price. So while these changes to stamp duty may seem daunting, there are ways to try to mitigate the costs and make smarter buying decisions. So here's a few tips to try and reduce the SDLT and make the most of the current changes. If you're buying with your child's name over the age of 18 or a family member who's a first-time buyer, you could structure the purchase as long as they buy under £500,000. This way they can take advantage of the first-time buyer relief and pay significantly less or no stamp duty at all, depending on the purchase price. For example, if your child over the age of 18 buys a property for £500,000 as a first-time buyer, their SDLT bill would be £10,000 after April the 1st, 2025, instead of £15,000 as a standard buyer or £40,000 if it was an additional purchase. So this could be an additional saving. However, it's important that the first-time buyer is genuinely a first-time buyer and doesn't own any property globally. Another way to manage the SDLT costs is to target properties between £300,000 to £900,000 if you're a standard buyer. Hear me out, here's why. At these price points, the SDLT due is between 1.69 to 3.89% of the property's value. So even with the upcoming changes, the UK still is competitive when it comes to stamp duty compared to other countries. For example, in Hong Kong, where we are, buyers pay around 15% stamp duty for a similar transaction. In Singapore, ABSD, which is additional buyer's stamp duty, for foreign buyers can be as high as 60%. So this is for the investors. If you're in a position to invest, buying 6 or more properties in the same transaction can be a smart way to significantly reduce your SDLT bill. So a purchase of 6 or more properties is classified as a non-residential transaction. So that will mean you'll pay lower SDLT rates. The rates for non-residential properties start at 0% for the first £150,000, 2% for the portion from £150,001 to £250,000, and a maximum of 5% for the amounts above £250,000. Now granted, this is for the investors out there and it's not for the mainstream, but if you were to buy 6 properties, let's say worth £400,000 each as a bulk purchase, then your SDLT costs will come down dramatically. So in number terms, if you were to buy them separately, it would be £180,000 in stamp duty versus just under £110,000 for the lot if it was a non-residential transaction. So you can potentially save 40% on that transaction alone on stamp duty. Another tip would be to time your purchase to beat the deadline of the 1st of April 2025 before the major changes come into play, and this could save you thousands of pounds. For example, if you were a first-time buyer buying before April the 1st, 2025, you would pay £3,750 in SDLT compared to £10,000 after 1st of April 2025. So if you act before these changes, it could make a big difference to your budget. Here at PitchBook Property, we have lots of properties in and around the £500,000 mark that are completed and are within London and beyond. So please do give us a shout and we'll be more than happy to help. But despite the changes with the SDLT, the UK property market is still seen as one of the most competitive and stable in the world. We at PitchBook Property have always seen UK property, London property as a safe haven. So it's a bit like buying gold as opposed to speculative property markets. Granted, the ups aren't as amplified as other property markets, but again, we would compare that to a blue chip stock versus a penny stock. So the UK has a lot going for it, although the current political situation, it is questionable. Having said that, the UK or London market is still very strong for us because our buyers are thinking long-term rather than a quick buck. Education is world-class and a big pull factor. Demand still outweighs supply, and London is a global city. Plus, if you're buying for yourself, you have a reason to buy and need a place to live for you or your family. Our team at Pitchbook Property are on hand to help and have the expertise to find the right property at the right price for you. And who knows, there might be another stamp duty holiday. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.